The dust storm raged across the Nevada territory like a beast unleashed from hell itself. Particles of sand and dirt swirled in violent columns, obscuring the vast landscape and turning day to dusk. Through this tempest, a lone rider pushed forward his horse, struggling against the punishing wind. The man hunched low over the saddle, one hand clutching the reins while the other pressed against a dark spreading stain on his chest. Douglas Hayes knew he was dying. The bullet that had torn through him had done its work well, and the life was draining from him with each labored heartbeat. But he would not die here, not in this God-forsaken wasteland where coyotes would pick his bones clean before anyone found him. No, he had to make it home. To her. "Just a little further, girl," he rasped to the mare beneath him, the words barely audible over the howling wind. "Get me home to Vivian." The small homestead appeared through the curtain of dust, like a mirage, the humble cabin he had built with his own hands standing defiant against the elements. Douglas felt a surge of relief so profound it momentarily dulled the pain. He urged the horse forward with the last of his strength, but his body had finally reached its limit. As they entered the yard, he slipped from the saddle, hitting the hard-packed earth with a dull thud. The front door flew open, and Vivian Hayes rushed out, heedless of the stinging particles that assaulted her face and eyes. Her heart seized at the sight of her husband crumpled on the ground, blood pooling beneath him. "Douglas!" she cried, dropping to her knees beside him. Her delicate hands, once accustomed only to playing the piano in Boston parlors, now moved with practiced efficiency, searching for the wound. Douglas's eyes fluttered open at the sound of her voice. Through the haze of pain he looked up at his wife, her fair skin already reddened by 2 years of Nevada sun, her honey-colored hair escaping its pins in the wind. He had never seen anything more beautiful. "Vivian," he whispered, his voice barely audible as she leaned close. "Listen carefully." She nodded, tears making clean tracks down her dust-covered face. "Don't let them take this land." Douglas gasped each word an effort. "Warren, he'll come for it. Find Thatcher. Mason Thatcher. He'll help you." "Thatcher from Lone Pine?" Vivian asked, confusion mingling with her grief. "But you haven't spoken to him in years." A coughing fit seized Douglas, bringing a fresh flow of blood to his lips. When it passed, he grasped her hand with surprising strength. "Promise me. Find him." "I promise," she said, the words catching on a sob. "But don't leave me, Douglas. Please, don't leave me here alone." But Douglas Hayes's eyes had already fixed on something beyond her, beyond the dust and the wind and the pain. His hand went slack in hers, and Vivian knew he was gone. She gathered her husband's body into her arms and wept as the storm raged around them, uncaring of her loss, uncaring of her grief. In that moment, Vivian Hayes, who had once been Vivian Calloway of Beacon Hill, with soft hands and a finishing school education, felt the full weight of her solitude in this harsh, unforgiving land. 3 months passed, and spring brought a brief period of green to the Nevada desert. Vivian knelt in her small garden, coaxing stubborn plants from the reluctant soil. The work was hard, but she welcomed it. Physical exhaustion kept the grief at bay, at least during the daylight hours. She had tried to fulfill her promise to Douglas. 3 times she had ridden to Lone Pine Ranch, and 3 times she had been turned away by workers who said Mason Thatcher wasn't receiving visitors. What grudge the man held against her husband, she didn't know. Douglas had rarely spoken of his life before they met, and never of the falling out with his once friend. Vivian sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. Her fingers were no longer those of a Boston lady. They were calloused and stained with soil badges of her survival. In the distance, a cloud of dust rose from the road that led to town. Visitors were rare enough that Vivian instantly tensed one hand instinctively, going to the small revolver she kept in her apron pocket. As the riders drew closer, she recognized the lead figure, a tall man with a shock of white hair beneath his black hat. Warren Harrington Douglas's older brother. Behind him rode Reverend Reed, his stern face set in its habitual expression of disapproval, and a younger man she recognized as Oliver Harrington, the youngest of the three brothers. Vivian slowly rose to her feet, brushing soil from her skirts. She had met Warren only twice, once at her wedding and once at Douglas's funeral, and neither occasion had been pleasant. The way he looked at her as if she were something he'd found on the bottom of his boot had made it clear what he thought of his brother's Boston bride. Warren dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who had spent his life on horseback. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, his voice carrying across the yard, not bothering to remove his hat in greeting. "Mr. Harrington," Vivian replied, lifting her chin slightly. "This is an unexpected visit." "We've come to discuss the matter of Douglas's will," Warren said without preamble, "and the future of this property." Vivian's heart quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. "There's nothing to discuss. Douglas left everything to me as his wife." Warren's mouth twisted in something that might have been a smile on another face. "Did he now? Because I have documents that say otherwise. This land has been Harrington property for 3 generations. Douglas was merely borrowing it." "That's a lie," Vivian said, anger flaring. "My husband owned this land outright. I have the deed." "A deed that requires certain conditions to be valid," Warren countered, "including the birth of a male heir within 2 years of marriage, a condition you've failed to meet, Mrs. Hayes." The deliberate cruelty of his words struck Vivian like a physical blow. The child she had lost last winter, the tiny son who had never drawn breath, was a wound still raw in her heart. "That's an archaic clause, Mr. Harrington, and unenforceable by territorial law," she said, willing her voice not to shake. Warren turned to Reverend Reed, who stepped forward, Bible clutched to his chest. "Mrs. Hayes, we've also come on another matter, a matter of moral concern to the community." Vivian frowned. "What are you talking about? You've been seen in the company of Gabriel Mendoza." The Reverend said, his voice dropping to a scandalized whisper on the Mexican name. "Multiple times, and in a manner some might call familiar." Vivian stared at them in disbelief. "Gabriel sells grain at the general store. I've spoken to him twice, once to purchase supplies, and once to ask for directions when I got lost returning from Lone Pine." "So you admit to seeking out the Mexican?" Warren pounced as if she had confessed to some great sin. "I admit to speaking to another human being," Vivian replied, anger now overcoming her fear. "As any decent person would." Warren took a step closer, looming over her. "You dishonor my brother's memory with your behavior. A proper widow keeps to herself. She doesn't consort with foreigners barely 3 months after laying her husband to rest." Vivian held her ground, though her heart hammered in her chest. "I think we're done here, Mr. Harrington. I'll thank you to leave my property." Something dark flickered in Warren's eyes. "No, Mrs. Hayes, we're just getting started." He turned to Oliver. "Get the things from my saddlebag." Oliver hesitated, a flash of something like discomfort crossing his young face before he complied, retrieving a small leather case from Warren's horse. "Reverend Reed has kindly agreed to help us address your moral failing," Warren continued, "to ensure the good name of Harrington isn't further tarnished by your actions." The Reverend stepped forward, opening his Bible to a marked page. "Proverbs warns us that a disgraceful woman is like rot in her husband's bones, and Leviticus teaches that the adulterous woman shall be punished." A chill ran through Vivian as Warren opened the leather case, revealing a straight razor. "What are you doing?" "Cleansing you of your sin," Warren said, his voice eerily calm, "and sending a message to others who might forget their place." Understanding dawned with horrifying clarity. "No," Vivian said, backing away. "You can't." But she didn't get to finish. Warren and Oliver moved with surprising speed, grabbing her arms. She fought, kicking and screaming, but they were stronger. They dragged her to the porch steps and forced her down. "Hold her still," Warren commanded Oliver, who complied with visible reluctance. Reverend Reed began to recite from his Bible, his voice droning over Vivian's protests. "If a woman is caught in adultery, she shall be brought forth and humbled before the community." Vivian's screams turned to sobs as Warren gripped a handful of her honey-colored hair. "This land belongs to Harrington blood," he hissed in her ear, "and you were never worthy of carrying it." The razor made a terrible scraping sound as it moved across her scalp. Vivian felt the weight of her hair falling away lock by lock as Warren methodically stripped her of this most feminine symbol. Blood trickled down her neck from where the blade nicked her skin, mixing with her tears. She looked desperately at Oliver, the youngest Harrington, whose face was pale with discomfort. "Please," she whispered. "Please stop him." But Oliver looked away, unable to meet her gaze, unwilling to defy his elder brother. Through it all, the Reverend continued his prayer, sanctifying this cruelty with words of God. The wind picked up, carrying Vivian's shorn hair across the yard, golden strands dancing like autumn leaves before settling in the dust. When it was done, Warren stepped back to survey his work, a terrible satisfaction in his eyes. "We'll be back tomorrow with the proper papers," he said. "Be gone by sunset, or we'll do worse than shave you." They left her there, bloody and shorn dignity in tatters, like her hair on the ground. Vivian didn't move for a long time, even after the dust from their horses had settled. The Nevada sun beat down on her exposed scalp, a new and terrible sensation. No one would help her. The Harringtons owned half the county and employed the other half. The sheriff was Warren's drinking companion. The Reverend, as she had just witnessed, was firmly in his pocket. Slowly, Vivian rose on unsteady legs and went inside the cabin. She caught her reflection in the small mirror Douglas had hung for her. A stranger stared back, skull gleaming obscenely in the afternoon light, streaked with blood and tears. She looked away quickly, unable to bear the sight. She should pack, she knew, take what little she could carry, and flee. But where would she go? Back to Boston to face the shame of returning a widow and a failure. To throw herself on the mercy of parents who had disowned her for marrying beneath her station. Instead, Vivian returned to the porch steps and sat a threadbare shawl pulled over her ruined head. The vast Nevada landscape stretched before her, indifferent to her suffering. Douglas had loved this land, had seen beauty, where she had initially seen only desolation. She had learned to love it through his eyes, and now she would lose it, just as she had lost him. The sound of approaching hoofbeats roused her from her stupor. For a moment, Vivian thought Warren had returned early, and fear jolted through her. But the lone rider approaching from the eastern hills was a stranger, tall and weathered, with silver threading his dark hair. He rode a magnificent black stallion, guiding it with the easy confidence of a man who had spent a lifetime in the saddle. As he drew closer, Vivian recognized him from descriptions she had heard in town. Mason Thatcher, owner of the Lone Pine Ranch, one of the few men in the territory who didn't bow to Harrington money. The man Douglas had told her to find. Vivian pulled the shawl tighter around her head, but there was no hiding what they had done to her. Mason Thatcher dismounted at her gate, studying her for a long moment, his gray eyes taking in her appearance without flinching. "Mrs. Hayes," he said finally, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who never had to raise it to be heard. "Mr. Thatcher," she replied, her own voice raw from screaming. "You're a bit late." If her bitterness surprised him, he didn't show it. "I came as soon as I heard what happened." "And how did you hear?" Vivian asked. "I have eyes in town." He paused, then added, "I should have come sooner. I owe Douglas that much." Vivian laughed, a harsh sound, devoid of humor. "Douglas is beyond caring about debts now." Mason nodded, acknowledging the truth of her words. Then, without further preamble, he said simply, "You're coming with me." Vivian's hands flew to her head, clutching the shawl. "I can't. Look at me." "I am looking." Mason's voice held no pity, which somehow made it easier to bear. "And I see a woman who's been wronged. Nothing more, nothing less." She wanted to refuse. Taking charity from a stranger felt like another kind of shame piled on top of what the Harringtons had already heaped upon her. But pride was a luxury she couldn't afford, not with night coming, and Warren's promise of worse hanging over her. "Why—" The words scraped raw from her throat. Mason adjusted his hat brim against the climbing sun. "Because what they did was wrong. Because I've got space." He paused, something flickering across his weathered features. "Because Douglas came to me a week before he died. He knew they would come for you." Vivian stared at him, shock momentarily overriding her shame. "You saw him before he died." "He found me at Lone Pine," Mason confirmed. "First time we'd spoken in years. Said he had a bad feeling about Warren. Asked me to look out for you if anything happened to him." "And you waited 3 months to honor that request." Vivian couldn't keep the accusation from her voice. "I sent word. 3 times. Mason's expression darkened. "My men said you never received the messages." A chill ran through Vivian that had nothing to do with the breeze. Someone had intercepted Mason's messages, likely the same someone who had made sure she found no help in town after Douglas died. From the road came the distant sound of riders approaching. Mason followed her gaze, his hand dropping instinctively to the gun at his hip. "Warren said they'd be back tomorrow," Vivian said, fear sharpening her voice. "Looks like they're early," Mason replied grimly. "Decide now. Stay and face whatever they've got planned, or ride with me." Vivian looked at her little homestead, the cabin Douglas had built with his own hands, the garden she'd tended, the life she'd tried to build. Then she looked at the approaching riders. She counted at least 5 men. The Harrington brothers, likely the sheriff, and hired guns. She stood on unsteady legs. "I'll come." Mason helped her onto his horse, mounting behind her. Vivian leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest, the steady beat of his heart. The shawl slipped, exposing her shorn head to the afternoon sun, but she no longer cared who saw her shame. As they rode away, Warren's voice carried on the wind. "Thatcher, you bring her back here." But Mason only urged his horse faster, taking them through arroyos and over ridges with the confidence of a man who knew every stone and shadow of this land. Vivian didn't look back. There was nothing for her there now. The Lone Pine Ranch spread across a valley sheltered by red rock formations, its buildings nestled against the backdrop of rugged cliffs. A single ancient pine stood sentinel on the highest ridge, the namesake of the property, Mason explained as they approached. The main house was built solid and square, crafted from local stone and timber to withstand the harsh elements of the territory. Outbuildings, corrals, and a bunkhouse formed a protective perimeter around a central courtyard. It was a working ranch, not a showpiece, but Vivian could see the care and attention that had gone into its creation. As they rode into the yard, a Mexican woman emerged from the kitchen door, wiping her hands on her apron. Her silver-streaked black hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her weathered face spoke of a lifetime under the southwestern sun. "Rosa," Mason called as he dismounted, then helped Vivian down from the horse. "This is Mrs. Hayes. She'll be staying with us." The older woman took one look at Vivian's shawl-covered head and nodded grimly, her dark eyes flashing with understanding and anger on Vivian's behalf. "Harringtons," she said, the name itself a curse on her lips. "Come inside, Senora. I will prepare a room." But even as Rosa led Vivian toward the house, they could hear the thunder of hoofbeats growing closer. Through the kitchen window, Vivian watched the dust cloud approach her stomach, clenching with familiar terror. "They're coming," she whispered. Mason checked his rifle, his movements calm and methodical. "Let them. You don't understand. They'll burn you out. They've done it before to anyone who crossed them. Then they'll learn something new today." Mason's voice was level, but steel ran beneath the words. Rosa pressed a cup of hot tea into Vivian's trembling hands. "Drink this, Senora. It will steady your nerves." Vivian sipped the bitter liquid, grateful for something to focus on besides the approaching danger. As she did, a young boy appeared in the doorway, watching her with solemn eyes. He couldn't have been more than 12, with Mason's gray eyes, but softer features. "Daniel," Rosa explained, seeing Vivian's questioning look. "Mr. Thatcher's nephew." The boy didn't speak, but his gaze was unnervingly perceptive. He studied Vivian's covered head, then her face, as if committing her features to memory. His mother was Mason's younger sister, Rebecca. Rosa added softly, noticing Vivian's curiosity. She and her husband, a schoolteacher from Colorado, were visiting when the fever struck 5 years ago. The same outbreak that took Catherine. She crossed herself quickly. Daniel was only 7 then. The fever spared him, but he hasn't spoken a word since losing both parents and his aunt in the span of a week. Mr. Thatcher has raised him as his own. Rosa paused, her weathered face softening. "The boy sees things others miss. Catherine always said he had the gift of sight that runs in her Cherokee bloodline, though how that passed to him." She shrugged. "Some mysteries aren't for us to understand." Jose said something to him in rapid Spanish, and he disappeared down a hallway, returning moments later with a small pad of paper and a pencil. To Vivian's surprise, he settled at the kitchen table and began to draw, seemingly untroubled by the commotion outside. Rosa said something to him in rapid Spanish, and he disappeared down a hallway, returning moments later with a small pad of paper and a pencil. To Vivian's surprise, he settled at the kitchen table and began to draw, seemingly untroubled by the commotion outside. 6 riders surrounded the house, their horses stamping and snorting in the yard. Warren Harrington dismounted, his face flushed with anger. His brothers flanked him, Nathan with his cruel smile, Oliver hanging back slightly. Sheriff Morrison sat his horse like a man who wished he were anywhere else, and 2 strangers with the hard eyes of hired guns completed the group. "Thatcher," Warren's voice cracked like a whip across the yard. "Send out our property." Mason stepped onto the porch, rifle loose in his hands. "Don't see any property here. Just a woman under my protection." "That woman belongs to us," Nathan Harrington called. "She was married to our brother." "Your brother's dead," Mason replied coldly. "Marriage ended with him." Nathan spat into the dirt. "She dishonored his memory, running around with that Mexican, flaunting herself." "That's a lie," Vivian called from the doorway, her voice stronger than she felt. Warren's eyes blazed at the sight of her. "You calling us liars, whore?" Mason's rifle came up an inch. "Call her that again," he said softly, "and I'll put a hole through you, Warren." The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Sheriff Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his saddle, his hand hovering near his badge as if remembering what it was supposed to mean. "Last chance, Thatcher," Warren growled. "Send her out, or we'll take her. Over my dead body." Nathan laughed a sound like breaking glass. "That can be arranged." Time crystallized into heartbeats. Vivian watched from the doorway, her hand pressed to her throat, feeling the weight of every choice that had led to this moment. 6 guns against 1. No matter how skilled Mason might be, she'd brought death to his door. Then Rosa appeared beside her, carrying a shotgun like she'd been born to it. "Rosa, no," Vivian whispered. "See," the older woman replied firmly. This is home. We protect home." From the barn came another sound boots on boards. A young man emerged, rifle in hand. Then another from behind the house. Ranch hands, Vivian realized. Men who worked for Mason Thatcher. Men who would stand and fight. Sheriff Morrison cleared his throat. "Now, Warren, maybe we should—" "Shut up, Morrison." But Warren's certainty had cracked. 6 against 1 was odds he liked. 6 against 6, with Mason Thatcher's reputation factored in, was something else entirely. "I'll go with them," Vivian said, suddenly stepping forward. "This isn't your fight." Mason didn't turn around. "Yes, it is." "Why—" the word tore from her chest. "Why risk everything for someone you barely know?" Now he did turn his gray eyes, holding hers. "Because the day we stop protecting those who can't protect themselves is the day we stop being human." He paused, something soft creeping into his voice. "And because Catherine always said, the measure of a man isn't what he does when people are watching. It's what he does when no one would blame him for walking away." Vivian felt something break open in her chest. Not the brittle crack of heartbreak, but the warm flood of belonging. This strange, stern man who'd offered sanctuary without questions, who spoke of his dead wife like she still guided his choices, who'd rather die than surrender someone under his protection. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once, then turned back to face the Harringtons. "You've got your answer. Ride away, or we settle this now." Warren Harrington's face contorted with rage, and something else, the dawning realization that his power had limits, that there were still men in this territory who wouldn't bend the knee to Harrington money and threats. "This isn't over, Thatcher." "Yes," Mason replied quietly. "It is." Sheriff Morrison was the first to break. He reined his horse around, tipping his hat to Mason. "Miss Vivian, Mr. Thatcher, I'll be heading back to town now." The spell shattered. Warren cursed, but the moment had passed. Without the sheriff's badge to hide behind, they were just 6 men threatening a fortified ranch. Even Harrington pride had its limits. "You'll regret this," Warren snarled, but he was already backing toward his horse. "Doubt it," Mason replied. They rode away in a cloud of dust and wounded pride, leaving only the whisper of wind through sage and the distant cry of a hawk. Vivian sank onto the porch steps, the weight of terror and relief making her legs unsteady. "Is it over?" she asked. For now, Mason sat beside her close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "They won't be back today. Warren's not fool enough to start a range war he can't win. And my homestead? I'll send men to collect your things. Anything you want to keep." Vivian nodded, grateful but embarrassed by his kindness. "I can pay you back. I have some savings and—" "Stop," Mason interrupted gently. "Douglas was my friend once, the best I ever had. This is the least I can do for his widow." The mention of Douglas brought a fresh wave of grief. "What happened between you two?" she asked. "He never spoke of it." Mason was quiet for a long moment, watching the sun sink toward the red rocks on the horizon. "It's a long story," he said finally, "and not a happy one." Before Vivian could press further, Daniel appeared in the doorway. The boy approached shyly, holding out his drawing pad. On it was a sketch of Vivian, not as she was now with her shorn head, but as she might have been with long flowing hair and a peaceful expression. "Thank you," she said, touched by the gesture. "It's beautiful." Daniel nodded, a small smile lighting his solemn face. He pointed to her, then to the drawing, then up at the sky. "He says that's the real you," Rosa explained, joining them on the porch. "The inside you. Daniel sees what others don't." "He doesn't speak?" Vivian asked softly. Rosa shook her head. "Not since his mother died. 5 years now." Mason stood abruptly, as if the conversation had become too painful. "Rosa will show you to your room. You should rest. It's been a long day." As he walked away, Vivian noticed the stiffness in his shoulders, the careful way he held himself as if one wrong move might shatter something precious. "He carries much weight," Rosa said, following Vivian's gaze. "Too much, maybe." "Catherine," Vivian guessed. Rosa's eyes widened slightly. He spoke of her, just something she used to say. The older woman crossed herself. "He doesn't speak of her. Not to anyone." She studied Vivian with new interest. "Come, I will show you where you will stay." As they entered the house, Vivian caught a glimpse of Daniel watching them from the corner, his young face thoughtful. He held up his drawing pad, revealing a new sketch, this one of Mason, but not as the stern, weathered man she had met today. In Daniel's drawing, Mason was smiling, his face years younger, standing beside a woman with kind eyes and a halo of dark curls. Catherine, Vivian realized, the woman whose memory still guided Mason's moral compass. The woman whose death had left such a void that Mason filled it with silence and duty. For the first time since Douglas died, Vivian felt a connection to something beyond her grief. Curiosity about this household of broken people who had taken her in, and the mysteries that bound them together. That night, Rosa prepared a bath for Vivian in a small room off the kitchen. The warm water was scented with lavender and chamomile, a luxury she hadn't experienced since leaving Boston. As she sank into it, Vivian felt the tension begin to leach from her body. Her scalp stung where the razor had cut her, but Rosa had provided a salve that numbed the worst of the pain. Still, Vivian avoided looking at her reflection in the small mirror on the wall. She couldn't bear to see what they had done to her, the way they had marked her as shameful, less than human. A soft knock at the door startled her. "Senora," Rosa's voice called. "I have brought you something." Vivian quickly wrapped herself in a towel. "Come in." The older woman entered, carrying a bundle of clothing and a small glass bottle. "Clean clothes," she explained, setting them on a chair. "They belong to Catherine, but she would want you to have them." "Oh, I couldn't." "You can, and you will," Rosa said firmly. "They do no good sitting in a trunk." She held up the glass bottle. "And this is lavender oil for your scalp. It will help the hair grow back stronger." Vivian accepted the bottle, touched by the thoughtfulness. "Thank you, Rosa." The Mexican woman nodded, then hesitated as if debating whether to say more. Finally, she spoke, her voice low. "I lost my hair once, too. In the flood of '68. I was trapped in the water for hours, my hair caught in debris. They had to cut it off to save me." She touched her silver-streaked bun. "It grows back, Senora. And when it does, you will be stronger for what you have survived." Without waiting for a response, Rosa turned to leave. But Vivian caught her hand. "Rosa," she said, "who was Catherine really?" Rosa's expression softened. "She was the heart of this place. Mr. Thatcher's wife, yes, but more than that. A healer with Cherokee blood who wouldn't turn away anyone in need, no matter their standing." How did she die? Vivian asked gently. Rosa's voice tightened. Fever 5 years ago. She tended to others during the outbreak, then fell ill herself. She paused, her dark eyes reflecting old pain. There is more to that story, but it is not mine to tell. Perhaps, in time, Mr. Thatcher will share it with you himself. Vivian felt a chill that had nothing to do with her cooling bath. That's horrible. It is the way of men like Warren Harrington, Rosa said bitterly. They believe they own the land, the water, even the air we breathe. Catherine challenged that, and she paid the price. She squeezed Vivian's hand. You rest now, Senora. Tomorrow is a new day. After Rosa left, Vivian dressed in the borrowed clothes, a simple blue cotton dress that hung slightly loose on her smaller frame. She ran her fingers over the fabric, wondering about the woman who had worn it before. Catherine must have been beloved to inspire such loyalty 5 years after her death. When Vivian emerged from the bath, she found Daniel waiting in the hallway, his drawing pad clutched to his chest. The boy beckoned for her to follow him, leading her down a corridor to a small room she hadn't seen before. It was a study of sorts with bookshelves lining one wall and a desk positioned beneath a window that looked out over the valley. Daniel went to the desk and opened a drawer, removing a leather-bound book. He held it out to Vivian with solemn eyes. "What is this?" she asked, taking it from him. Daniel mimed opening the book and reading, then pointed to a framed photograph on the wall, Mason and a dark-haired woman standing together in front of the house. "Catherine." Vivian hesitated. It felt like an invasion of privacy to read something that had clearly belonged to Mason's wife, but Daniel's insistence suggested it was important. She opened the book to find a journal written in a neat feminine hand. October 12, 1878. Douglas visited today. He and Mason still cannot be in the same room without arguing, but at least they spoke civilly. I believe there is hope for reconciliation. The wound is old, but not beyond healing. If only they could see that neither of them was truly at fault for what happened. Vivian's breath caught at the mention of her husband. She flipped forward several pages. January 3, 1879. The winter has been harsh. 3 families down in the valley have lost children to fever. I've been riding out daily to tend to the sick, though Mason worries about my own health. He doesn't understand that I cannot turn away from suffering no more than he could ride past a fallen horse without stopping to help. We are who we are. Warren Harrington sent word that his workers are not to accept my help anymore. He claims my medicines are foreign and unsafe. The truth is, he cannot bear to see a woman, especially a half-Cherokee woman, practicing medicine on his land. His pride will cost lives, but what is that to a man like Warren? Vivian looked up at Daniel, who was watching her intently. Catherine was half-Cherokee, she asked. The boy nodded, then pointed to himself and held up a single finger. 1/4, Vivian guessed, and Daniel nodded again. She turned back to the journal, flipping through more entries until she reached one of the last ones. April 17, 1879. I dreamt of water last night. Clean, flowing water washing over parched land. A good omen, I hope. The drought has everyone on edge. Warren has been diverting the creek that runs through his property, leaving those downstream with barely enough for their crops and animals. Mason confronted him yesterday, but Warren only laughed and said water, like everything else, belonged to whoever was strong enough to take it. I fear for this land and its people. Greed is a poison that spreads from one heart to many. If only men like Warren could see that true strength lies in sharing abundance, not hoarding it. The final entry was dated just a week later, the handwriting noticeably shakier. April 24, 1879. The fever came on suddenly. Mason has sent for the doctor, but I know what this is. The same sickness that took so many children this winter. I have prepared the medicines, but my hands shake too much to measure them properly. Rosa helps bless her. If this is my time, I go with only one regret, that I could not heal the rift between Mason and Douglas. They were brothers in all but blood once. Tell Mason, if I cannot, that forgiveness is not weakness. It is the ultimate strength. And tell him to listen for me in the wind through the lone pine. I will speak to him there always. The journal ended abruptly, and Vivian closed it with trembling hands. She looked up to find Mason standing in the doorway, his face unreadable. "Daniel," he said quietly, "go help Rosa with supper." The boy slipped past his uncle without protest, leaving Vivian alone with Mason and the ghost of Catherine that seemed to fill the small room. "I'm sorry," Vivian said, holding out the journal. "I didn't mean to pry." Mason crossed to the window, looking out at the gathering dusk. "Daniel wanted you to read it. He has his reasons." She seemed like an extraordinary woman. She was. Mason's voice was rough with emotion he clearly tried to suppress. Vivian hesitated, then asked the question that had been burning in her mind since reading the journal. "What happened between you and Douglas?" Catherine wrote that you were like brothers once. Mason was silent for so long that Vivian thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, as if coming from years away. "We grew up together, Douglas and I. Our fathers' ranches bordered each other before Warren inherited everything. We were inseparable as boys." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Got into all sorts of trouble together. Dreamed of running our own spread someday side by side." What changed? Mason turned to face her, his gray eyes shadowed with memory. "Catherine happened. Or rather, we both happened to love her." Vivian felt a jolt of surprise. "Douglas was in love with Catherine. We both were, from the moment she arrived in the territory to teach at the mission school." Mason ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "It nearly destroyed our friendship, but in the end, she chose me. And Douglas," he stepped back, "said he valued our brotherhood more than any woman." "That doesn't sound like a rift," Vivian said, confused. "It sounds like Douglas did the honorable thing." "He did," Mason agreed. It was later that things fell apart. After the wedding, Douglas started spending more time with Warren. Got involved in some of his schemes. I didn't approve, but I kept my mouth shut. Not my place to tell a man how to live. He picked up the photograph of Catherine, running a thumb over the glass. Then Catherine started her healing work, treating anyone who needed help, regardless of race or standing. Warren didn't like it, especially when she tended to Mexican workers who'd been beaten on his ranch. He threatened her, told her to mind her own business. "And Douglas," Vivian prompted when Mason fell silent. "Douglas defended her to Warren's face," Mason said. "But behind closed doors, he told me I should control my wife better. Said she was stirring up trouble that would come back on all of us." His jaw tightened at the memory. "We had words. Things were said that couldn't be taken back. He left Lone Pine that day, and we barely spoke for years." "Until the week before he died," Vivian murmured. Mason nodded, setting the photograph down carefully. "He rode in here like a ghost from the past. Said he needed to make things right. That he'd been a fool to side with Warren, even partially. That he'd seen the kind of man his brother really was." "What kind of man is that?" Vivian asked, though she already knew the answer. "The kind who would kill his own brother for a piece of land," Mason said bluntly. Vivian stared at him, the implications of his words sinking in. "Are you saying Warren had Douglas killed?" I'm saying Douglas wasn't killed by random bandits like the story goes. Mason's eyes were hard now. He told me he'd found something on his land, something Warren would kill for. He didn't say what, but he was scared enough to make amends with me after 5 years of silence. Scared enough to ask me to protect you if anything happened to him. And a week later, he was dead, Vivian whispered. Mason nodded grimly. Shot in the back on his way home from town. Convenient, wasn't it? Vivian's mind raced. What could Douglas have found on their small homestead that was worth killing for? They barely scratched out a living as it was. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? She asked. I tried. Mason's frustration was evident. I sent 3 messages after his funeral, all returned with word that you'd refused to see my men. I never received any messages, Vivian said. And when I rode to Lone Pine myself, your workers turned me away. They stared at each other as understanding dawned. Someone had deliberately kept them apart, intercepting messages, turning away visitors. Someone who didn't want Vivian to find the protection Douglas had arranged for her. Warren, they said in unison. A knock at the door interrupted them. Rosa stood there, her expression grave. Mr. Thatcher Daniel says riders coming. Many of them. Mason moved instantly, heading for the door. Stay inside with Rosa, he told Vivian. Daniel knows where to hide if things go wrong. No, Vivian said, surprising herself with her firmness. I won't hide anymore. This is my fight too. Mason looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her face must have convinced him. Stay behind me then, he said finally. As they headed for the porch, Vivian felt a strange calm settle over her. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled her. She had lost her husband, her home, even her hair, but she would not lose her dignity again. Whatever Warren Harrington had planned, she would face it standing tall. The future was uncertain, fraught with danger. But for the first time since Douglas's death, Vivian didn't feel alone. She had found allies in this household of wounded souls, Mason with his quiet strength, Rosa with her practical wisdom, and Daniel with his silent perception. Together, they stepped out onto the porch to face whatever was coming. The setting sun cast long shadows across the yard as Mason, Vivian, and Rosa stepped onto the porch. The approaching riders were still distant dust clouds billowing behind them like angry spirits. Mason lifted a brass telescope to his eye, scanning the horizon. Not Warren, he said after a moment, his shoulders relaxing slightly. It's Gabriel with my men returning from town. Vivian felt relief wash through her. Gabriel Mendoza, the man Warren accused me of impropriety with. Mason lowered the telescope, a hint of amusement touching his weathered face. The very same. Though in truth, he's Rosa's cousin and has been working for me for years. They used him to slander me, Vivian said, the injustice still raw. A man I barely spoke to. Warren knows most folks around here fear what's different, Mason replied. Easiest way to turn them against you was to link you with a Mexican. Rosa sniffed disapprovingly. As if my Gabriel would look twice at a woman in mourning. He has more respect. The riders drew closer, 4 men led by a lean figure with a distinctive wide-brimmed hat. Gabriel Mendoza rode with the easy grace of a man born to the saddle, his dark features set in a serious expression. Behind him, the other men led pack horses laden with crates and bundles. Your belongings, Senora, Rosa explained, seeing Vivian's questioning look. Mr. Thatcher sent them to collect what they could from your homestead before the Harringtons returned. Tears pricked Vivian's eyes at this unexpected kindness. Thank you, she whispered. Mason nodded once, accepting her gratitude without comment, then descended the steps to meet the approaching riders. Gabriel dismounted in a fluid motion. We got most of it, Jefe, he reported to Mason. Clothes, books, personal items. The Harringtons hadn't returned yet, but he hesitated, glancing at Vivian. "Speak freely, Gabriel," Mason said. "We saw them on the road back, headed that way with wagons. Looked like they mean to clear the place out." Vivian felt a fresh stab of loss. Everything she and Douglas had built together being dismantled by the very family that had taken his life. She swayed slightly, and Rosa's steadying hand appeared at her elbow. "Come, Senora," the older woman said gently. "Let the men unload. You should eat something." Vivian allowed herself to be led back inside, where Daniel waited at the kitchen table. The boy had set out plates and cutlery, and a pot of something savory bubbled on the stove, filling the room with the comforting aroma of home cooking. "He helps without being asked," Rosa explained, noticing Vivian's surprised look. "Catherine taught him well." At the mention of Catherine, Daniel's solemn face brightened slightly. He moved to a sideboard and retrieved a worn, leather-bound book, which he placed beside Vivian's plate with great care. "La Biblia de Señora Catherine," Rosa explained. "Her Bible. She read from it every night." Vivian opened the book gently, finding the pages marked with pressed flowers and handwritten notes in the margins. Certain passages were underlined, mostly those speaking of compassion, justice, and the inherent worth of all people. She studied it like medicine. Rosa continued stirring the pot on the stove. "Not as rules to follow, but as wisdom to consider." She said, "God speaks most clearly through acts of kindness, not words in a book." Daniel nodded emphatically at this, then flipped the Bible to a marked page in Proverbs. Vivian read the underlined verse, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy." "This was her favorite," Rosa said, looking over Vivian's shoulder. "She read it to Warren Harrington once when he came here demanding she stop treating his workers. He spat on the ground and called her a meddling squaw." Vivian flinched at the slur. "Because of her Cherokee heritage," Rosa nodded grimly. "Catherine's mother was full Cherokee, survived the Trail of Tears as a child. Catherine was proud of her blood, though many tried to make her ashamed." She ladled stew into bowls as she spoke. "That is why Daniel brought you her Bible, to show you there is no shame in who you are or what has been done to you." Daniel touched his own chest, then Vivian's, and finally pointed upward, a gesture she somehow understood as meaning their true worth came from something higher than men's opinions. "You're very wise for your age," Vivian told the boy, who ducked his head shyly at the compliment. The door opened, and Mason entered with Gabriel. Both men removed their hats, revealing dust-streaked faces and tired eyes. "Everything's unloaded," Mason reported. "Your things are in the guest room, Mrs. Hayes." "Vivian," she corrected gently. "After today, I think formality seems rather pointless, Mr. Thatcher." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Mason, then." They settled around the table, an unlikely gathering, the Boston widow with her shorn head, the taciturn rancher, the Mexican housekeeper, and her cousin, and the silent boy, who watched them all with perceptive eyes. As Rosa served her hearty stew, Vivian realized this was the first proper meal she'd had since Douglas died. Grief and solitude had stolen her appetite, but here, surrounded by these strangers who had risked themselves for her hunger, returned. The conversation flowed more easily than Vivian expected. Gabriel recounted town gossip, his storytelling animated and punctuated with Spanish phrases that made Rosa laugh and Mason shake his head in grudging amusement. Daniel communicated through gestures and quick sketches on his ever-present pad. And through it all, Mason watched Vivian with quiet attention, as if assessing her resilience. After dinner, As Rosa and Daniel cleared the table, Mason beckoned Vivian to follow him. He led her down a hallway to a small room she hadn't seen before, a library of sorts with shelves of books and a large oak desk. This was Catherine's study, he explained, lighting a lamp that cast a warm glow over the space. She did her medical work here. Vivian looked around with interest. The shelves held an eclectic mix of volumes, medical texts, beside poetry, botanical guides, next to philosophical treatises. Dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams, filling the air with a subtle, earthy fragrance. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. Mason went to the desk and opened a drawer, retrieving a bundle of papers tied with twine. "These are yours," he said, holding them out to Vivian. "Douglas left them with me the last time I saw him." Vivian took the bundle with trembling hands. "What are they?" "I don't know. He asked me not to look, said they were for you alone if anything happened to him." Heart racing. Vivian untied the twine and unfolded the papers. The top sheet was a letter in Douglas's familiar handwriting. "My dearest Vivian, if you're reading this, then my fears have been realized, and I am no longer with you. First, know that I have loved you more truly than I believed myself capable of loving anyone. You brought light to my life when I had resigned myself to shadow. There are things I should have told you when I had the chance about my family, about my past, about the land we've called home. Warren is not the man he pretends to be. He has done terrible things in the name of the Harrington legacy, things I was complicit in through my silence for too many years. Recently, I discovered something on our land, a convergence of 3 underground springs hidden beneath the rocky outcropping behind our cabin. In this territory, water is more valuable than gold or silver. Warren has known about these springs for years, but believed they had dried up. When I found they were still flowing, I kept it secret from him, knowing what he would do to control them. I've enclosed a map marking their exact location, along with legal documents transferring full ownership of the land to you. These documents have been properly filed with the territorial office in Carson City, regardless of what Warren may claim. If you're reading this, seek out Mason Thatcher. Despite our differences, he is a good man, the best I've known. He will protect you when I cannot. Forgive me for the burden I've placed on you and for the secrets I've kept. Know that you have been the greatest blessing of my life. All my love." Douglas. Vivian looked up from the letter, tears blurring her vision. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew Warren would come for me, for the water." Mason's expression darkened. "In this land, men have killed for far less than a reliable water source." And he hesitated, then added, "Douglas mentioned a map." Vivian nodded, shuffling through the papers until she found a carefully drawn diagram of their property with 3 converging lines marked in blue beneath a distinctive rock formation. Accompanying the map were legal documents bearing official territorial seals, proof that the land belonged to her alone. "These would be enough to stop Warren's claim in any legitimate court," Mason observed. "But Warren doesn't play by legitimate rules," Vivian said, remembering the cruel cut of the razor against her scalp. "He makes his own. Then we make ours." Mason's voice was quiet, but resolute. "Starting tomorrow, I'll send men to guard your property. Warren won't take it without a fight." Before Vivian could respond, a commotion arose from the front of the house, voices raised in alarm, the sound of running footsteps. Mason was on his feet instantly, hand going to the gun at his hip. Gabriel burst into the room, his usual composure shattered. "Fire, Hefe! The Harrington place! It's burning!" They rushed outside to see an orange glow lighting the night sky to the north, where the Harrington ranch lay. Smoke billowed upward, visible even from this distance. "God have mercy," Vivian breathed. "Saddle the horses," Mason ordered Gabriel. Get the men. We'll need to help with the bucket line. Rosa appeared with lanterns and canteens. You cannot go, she argued. It could be a trap to draw you away from here. Trap or not, there are innocent people on that ranch, Mason replied firmly. Workers, children. I won't leave them to burn. His words echoed Catherine's philosophy so clearly that Vivian could almost feel the woman's presence among them. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. I'm coming with you, Vivian decided. Mason started to protest, but she cut him off. I was a volunteer nurse during the war. I can tend to the injured. After a moment's consideration, Mason nodded. Stay close to me. Daniel, you remain here with Rosa. The boy shook his head vehemently, pointing to himself and then to the horses. He says the stable is safest for him, Rosa translated. It's where he hid when Warren came before. Mason knelt to Daniel's level. You're sure, nephew? Daniel nodded, his young face set in determination. Very well. Mason straightened, addressing them all. We ride in 5 minutes. Be prepared for anything. As they hurried to prepare, Vivian caught sight of her reflection in a window, a strange, transformed woman with a stubbled head and fierce eyes. Not the Boston lady who had arrived in Nevada territory 2 years ago, nor even the grieving widow of 3 months past. Someone new was emerging from those ashes, tempered by loss and betrayal. She touched her scalp gingerly, feeling the rough texture beneath her fingertips. Warren had meant to shame her, to mark her as ruined. Instead, he had stripped away her last pretensions of the life she'd left behind. There was freedom in that, she realized, a terrible, painful freedom. 10 minutes later, they were riding hard toward the Harrington Ranch, the night air sharp with the scent of smoke and sage. Mason led the way with Vivian close behind, followed by Gabriel and 4 ranch hands. Daniel had insisted on coming riding double with Gabriel. As they crested a rise, the full extent of the disaster became clear. The main house of the Harrington Ranch was engulfed in flames, the fire having spread to nearby outbuildings. People scurried about like ants, forming bucket lines from the well to the flames, their efforts seemingly futile against the inferno. They rode into the chaotic scene, dismounting amid shouts and the roar of the fire. Mason immediately took charge, directing his men to join the bucket line while sending Gabriel to help evacuate the bunkhouse that housed the ranch workers. Stay with Daniel, he instructed Vivian. See if anyone needs medical attention. She nodded, taking the boy's hand as Mason strode off toward the heart of the crisis. The heat from the fire was intense, making her skin feel tight and dry. All around them, people moved in desperate haste, their faces ghoulishly illuminated by the flames. Daniel, do you know where they might take the injured? Vivian asked. The boy pointed toward a small cookhouse that stood apart from the main buildings, relatively safe from the fire. They made their way there, finding several people already gathered, a woman with burns on her arms, a man coughing violently from smoke inhalation, an elderly worker who appeared to have fallen in the chaos. Without hesitation, Vivian set to work. She sent Daniel to fetch water and clean cloths, then began assessing the wounded. The skills she had learned as a volunteer nurse, rusty from disuse, returned with surprising clarity. She cleaned burns, helped clear smoke-filled lungs, and bandaged cuts with the limited supplies available. As she worked, Vivian became aware of someone watching her. She looked up to find Oliver Harrington standing in the doorway, his young face smudged with soot and twisted with emotion. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, his voice barely audible over the commotion outside. I didn't expect to see you here." "Where else would I be when people need help?" she replied, continuing to wrap a bandage around a worker's lacerated arm. Oliver seemed at a loss for words. He was the youngest of the Harrington brothers, no more than 22, and had always seemed uncomfortable with Warren's cruelties. Now he stood awkwardly watching as Vivian tended to his family's workers with the same care she would give anyone. "My brother's not here," he said finally. "Warren, I mean. He rode out this afternoon after what happened at your place. Nathan went with him." I'm not looking for your brothers," Vivian said. "I'm just helping where I can." Oliver stepped fully into the cookhouse, lowering his voice. "Mrs. Hayes, I want you to know, I didn't want them to do that to you. It was wrong." Vivian's hands stilled momentarily. "But you didn't stop them." "I couldn't," he whispered, shame evident in his voice. "Warren would have what?" Vivian challenged her patience, suddenly exhausted. "Cut your hair too, made you less than human in the eyes of the community. Or are those punishments reserved only for women who don't know their place?" Oliver flinched as if struck. "I'm sorry," he said miserably. "I truly am." Before Vivian could respond, Mason appeared in the doorway, his clothing smoke-stained and his expression grim. "The fire's contained to the main house," he reported. "It'll burn itself out, but the structure's lost. Everyone's accounted for, thank God." "Do they know how it started?" Vivian asked. Mason's jaw tightened. "Not an accident, that's for certain. Someone doused the back porch with coal oil before setting it alight." Oliver made a choked sound. "Who would do such a thing?" "That's what I'd like to know," came a new voice from behind Mason. Sheriff Morrison stepped into the cookhouse, his badge gleaming dully in the lamplight. The lawman looked exhausted, his normally ruddy face pale beneath a layer of soot. "Thatcher," he acknowledged Mason with a nod. "Bit surprising to see you helping out the Harringtons, considering the bad blood." "Fires don't care about grudges, Sheriff," Mason replied evenly. "Neither do I when lives are at stake." Morrison turned his attention to Vivian, his eyes widening slightly at her appearance. "Mrs. Hayes, heard about what happened to you today. Shameful business. Yet you did nothing to stop it," Vivian noted, continuing her work on the injured. The sheriff had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I wasn't there." "But you knew what Warren planned," Mason said, his voice dangerously soft. "Just like you knew Douglas Hayes wasn't killed by random bandits." A tense silence fell over the cookhouse. Daniel pressed closer to Vivian's side, his small hand finding hers. "Careful, Thatcher," Morrison warned. "That's mighty close to accusing me of dereliction of duty." "Is it dereliction if you're paid to look the other way?" Mason asked. "Or is that just Warren's version of law enforcement?" The sheriff's hand drifted toward his gun, but Oliver stepped between them. "This isn't the time or place," the young Harrington said with unexpected authority. "We have injured people here who need care, not more violence." Morrison looked surprised at Oliver's intervention, but nodded grudgingly. "The boy's right. But this conversation isn't over, Thatcher." He turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. "By the way, a telegram came from Carson City today. Seems Douglas Hayes filed some interesting paperwork before he died. Paperwork that makes his widow the sole legal owner of his land, regardless of traditional arrangements." With that cryptic statement, the sheriff departed, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. "He knows about the water rights," Mason said quietly to Vivian. "That telegram must have confirmed the documents Douglas filed." "Then Warren knows too," Vivian realized with growing dread. "And if he wasn't here when the fire started?" "He could be headed for your homestead," Mason finished grimly. "Or worse, Lone Pine." Oliver looked between them, confusion evident. "What are you talking about? What water rights?" Mason ignored him, already moving toward the door. "We need to get back. Now." "Wait." Oliver caught Mason's arm. "Please, if Warren's done something, if he's hurt someone, I need to know." Mason studied the young man intently, as if weighing his sincerity. "Your brother killed Douglas Hayes for the water beneath his land," he said bluntly. "And I suspect he's behind this fire too, a distraction while he makes his next move." Oliver staggered back as if physically struck. "No," he whispered. "Warren wouldn't. He couldn't. He shaved a woman's head in public for speaking to a Mexican," Vivian said quietly. "What else do you think he's capable of?" The young Harrington's face crumpled, years of willful blindness giving way to terrible clarity. "Oh God," he moaned, sinking onto a bench. "The things I've ignored, the things I've allowed to happen." Under different circumstances, Vivian might have felt sympathy for him, but with each passing moment, the danger to Lone Pine, to Rosa, to their home grew more acute. "We need to go," she urged Mason, gathering Daniel. Mason nodded, turning to his men who had gathered at the doorway. "Gabriel, you and the others stay here. Help with the cleanup. Oliver, you're coming with us."
Thought way.
The young man looked up in surprise. "Because if your brother's planning what I think he is, I want a Harrington witness to whatever happens next." Mason's expression was grim. "It's time someone in your family stood for the truth." They rode hard through the night, the moon casting long shadows across the sage-dotted landscape. Vivian's muscles ached from the unaccustomed exertion, but fear drove her forward. The thought of Warren Harrington reaching Lone Pine before them, of what he might do to Rosa, was unbearable. Daniel rode with Mason, now the boy's small form nearly invisible against the rancher's broader silhouette. Oliver Harrington followed on a borrowed horse, his young face haggard with dawning comprehension of his family's true nature. As they crested the final ridge that overlooked Lone Pine, Vivian's heart sank. Riders had indeed arrived before them, 5 men on horseback, circled the main house, their intentions clear from the rifles they carried. Through the kitchen window she could see Rosa barricaded inside, the gleam of her shotgun visible in the lamplight. "We're too late," Mason muttered, reining his horse to a stop in the shadow of a large boulder. "How many men does Warren have?" Vivian asked Oliver. 5 or 6 that he pays regular," the young man replied, his voice tight with tension. "But that's not Warren down there." Mason raised his telescope, scanning the riders. "He's right. That's Nathan leading them. Warren must be elsewhere." "My homestead," Vivian realized. "He's gone after the water directly." Mason lowered the glass, his expression hardening. "Then we deal with Nathan first, then ride for your place." He turned to Oliver. "Your brother trusts you." Oliver nodded hesitantly. "More than most." "Then you're going to ride down there first. Tell them you escaped from us, that we're headed for the Hayes property. Get them to follow you away from the house." "And if they don't believe me, make them believe you," Mason said simply. "Unless you want more blood on your family's hands." Oliver swallowed hard, then straightened his shoulders. "I'll do it." "Daniel, you stay here with Mrs. Hayes," Mason instructed. "I'll circle around to the back of the house. Once Nathan and his men ride out, you two come down and help Rosa secure the place." Vivian wanted to protest being left behind, but she recognized the logic. She and Daniel would only slow Mason down if things turned violent. "Be careful," she said instead. A hint of warmth touched Mason's stern features. "Always am." He handed Daniel down to Vivian, then addressed Oliver once more. "You've got 10 minutes to convince them. Make them count." With that, Mason and Oliver separated, each riding in different directions around the ridge. Vivian and Daniel remained hidden, watching anxiously as Oliver's solitary figure approached the house, calling out to his brother. There was a moment of tense conversation, too distant to hear. Then Nathan and his men mounted up, following Oliver at a gallop away from Lone Pine. "Now," Vivian whispered to Daniel, and they hurried down the slope toward the house. Rosa met them at the door, shotgun still at the ready. "Gracias a Dios," she breathed, embracing Daniel fiercely before turning to Vivian. "I feared the worst when I saw the riders." "Mason sent us ahead," Vivian explained quickly. "He's circling around to make sure Nathan and his men are truly gone. Warren may be at my homestead looking for the water source." Rosa crossed herself. "That man has the devil in him. Come inside quickly. I've prepared for siege." Indeed, she had. The Mexican woman had barricaded windows, gathered ammunition, and positioned weapons at strategic points throughout the house. In the kitchen, Vivian was surprised to find a trapdoor open in the floor, revealing a small cellar. "Catherine's idea," Rosa explained, seeing Vivian's expression. "A safe place if trouble came. She treated too many of Warren's enemies not to expect his vengeance someday." Daniel tugged at Vivian's sleeve, pointing urgently to the trapdoor. "He wants to show you something," Rosa translated. "Something important." Curious Vivian followed the boy down the narrow steps, into the cool darkness of the cellar. Rosa lit a lantern, illuminating a space that was part storeroom, part sanctuary. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with preserved food, medical supplies, and ammunition. But it was the far corner that Daniel led her to, where a small desk held a stack of leather-bound journals. "Catherine's medical diaries," Rosa explained as Daniel carefully opened one. She recorded everything: treatments, patients, illnesses, even deaths. Daniel flipped through the pages with purpose, finally stopping at an entry dated just weeks before Catherine's death. He pointed emphatically to a passage, his eyes intense. Vivian leaned closer to read the neat handwriting. "April 3rd, 1879. Treated TR for second-degree burns sustained at the Harrington sawmill. This is the third serious injury from that operation in as many weeks. The conditions there are criminally unsafe. When I mentioned this to Warren H., he laughed and said, 'Mexicans are cheaper than safety equipment.' I have documented these incidents in detail and sent copies to the Territorial Authority in Carson City. Warren will not be pleased when inspectors arrive, but I cannot remain silent about such callous disregards for human life." Later, Douglas visited today, agitated. He warned me that Warren is furious about my report and has threatened to make an example of me. D urged me to recant my statement for my own safety. I refused. Some principles cannot be compromised even for safety's sake. The look in D's eyes troubled me. Fear, yes, but also a deeper conflict. He stands between two worlds: the brother he has known all his life, and the moral truth he cannot deny. I pray he finds his way to the right choice before it's too late. Vivian looked up from the journal, a chill running through her. She knew Warren was dangerous, even then. Rosa nodded grimly. And 2 weeks later, when the fever came, Warren made sure the doctor never arrived. Catherine treated so many others during the outbreak, but when she herself fell ill, the older woman's voice broke. It was murder, as surely as if he had used a gun. Daniel flipped further through the journal, stopping at one of the final entries. Catherine's handwriting had deteriorated, the letters shaky and uneven. April 24th, 1879. I am failing quickly now. Rosa does what she can, but without proper medicines. I know this is Warren's revenge. Douglas came today weeping at my bedside. He has finally seen his brother's true nature, but too late to save me. I made him promise 2 things. First, that he would make peace with Mason, heal the rift I inadvertently caused between them. Second, that he would guard against Warren's greed, which knows no limits. There are good men in this world, and there are men like Warren who see others only as tools for their ambition. I fear what he will do once I am gone, with no one to witness his cruelties, but those too powerless to stop him. Mason has not left my side. His strength sustains me even as my body fails. My greatest regret is that I could not give him the child we both longed for. Little Daniel is a blessing, but I had hoped. No matter, what comes, comes. I go to my ancestors with a clear conscience, having lived by my principles. I ask only that those I leave behind remember this evil triumphs, when good people remain silent. Speak always, speak, even when your voice shakes. Tears slipped down Vivian's cheeks as she finished reading. She was extraordinary, she whispered. See, Rosa agreed softly. And Warren Harrington feared her because of it, just as he fears you now. Me? Vivian looked up in surprise. I'm nothing like Catherine. I have none of her courage or wisdom. Daniel shook his head vigorously, pointing to Vivian, then to the journal, his meaning clear. You are more like her than you know. Before Vivian could respond, footsteps sounded above them, and Mason's voice called down. All clear. Nathan and his men rode east toward the Hayes property. They climbed back up to find Mason checking the house's defenses, his movements efficient and practiced. We need to ride for your homestead, he told Vivian. Warren's almost certainly there by now, looking for the spring convergence. Then let him look, Vivian said, a sudden calm settling over her. The map Douglas left shows exactly where the springs meet, but Warren doesn't have that information. He could search for days and not find it. It won't stop him from trying, Mason warned, or from destroying your land in the process. Let him try, Vivian repeated, a new resolve hardening within her. That land is legally mine. Douglas made sure of it, and I'm tired of running from Warren Harrington. Mason studied her face, noting the transformation. The frightened widow he had found that morning, shamed and bleeding on her porch steps, had been replaced by a woman of steel and purpose. What do you propose? He asked. We ride to Carson City first thing tomorrow, Vivian said decisively. File my claim in person, request territorial protection. Warren can intimidate a local sheriff, but even he has limits to his influence. Mason nodded slowly. It could work, but tonight? Tonight we rest, Vivian interrupted. We've been riding for hours. The horses are exhausted, and so are we. Warren can dig up half my property searching for water he won't find without the map. Tomorrow is soon enough to deal with him. For a moment, Mason looked like he might argue. Then surprisingly, he smiled, a small but genuine expression that transformed his weathered face. Catherine would have approved of your strategy. She always said patience was the warrior's greatest weapon. The mention of Catherine brought a flash of connection between them, shared understanding of a woman whose principles continued to guide them both. Vivian felt it like a physical current, this invisible bond, with a woman she had never met, but whose presence filled the house. Then we wait until morning, Mason agreed. Rosa is there food for our unexpected guests. Always, the Mexican woman affirmed, already moving toward the stove. The marshal's mother taught me that an empty pot brings bad spirits. I keep something warm day and night. As Rosa busied herself with preparations, Mason drew Vivian aside. Oliver surprised me tonight, he admitted quietly. Standing against Nathan took courage I didn't think he possessed. People can surprise you, Vivian replied, thinking of her own transformation. When pushed to their limits. Mason nodded thoughtfully. Douglas changed at the end, too. When he came to see me that last time, he was different, like he'd finally recognized the poison in his family's legacy. Too late to save himself, Vivian murmured. But perhaps in time to save you, Mason countered. And what you both built together. They fell silent, each lost in thought, as Rosa set out a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee. Daniel sat beside Vivian, occasionally sketching in his pad, before showing her his drawings, a horse in mid-gallop, a falcon soaring above the mesas, and finally a portrait of Vivian herself, no longer with a shorn head, but with flowing hair and clear, determined eyes. "The future you?" Rosa explained, looking over Vivian's shoulder at the drawing. "Daniel sees what will be, not just what is." After they had eaten, Mason organized watches for the night, taking the first shift himself. Vivian was shown to a small bedroom that had clearly been prepared during her absence. Fresh linens on the bed, a basin of water for washing, and her own belongings unpacked and arranged with care. Alone at last, Vivian sank onto the edge of the bed, the day's events catching up with her in a wave of exhaustion. She touched her scalp gingerly, feeling the rough stubble beneath her fingers. In Boston, such a mutilation would have been a social death sentence. Here in Nevada, it had become a perverse badge of honor, proof of Warren Harrington's fear of her own resilience. A soft knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Rosa with extra blankets. Instead, it was Mason who entered carrying a small wooden box. "I thought you might want this," he said, setting it on the dresser. It belonged to Catherine. Vivian opened the box to find a collection of elegant silk scarves in rich, vibrant colors. "They're beautiful," she said, running a finger over the delicate fabric. She wore them when the territorial governor's wife visited. Mason explained a hint of old amusement in his voice. Said it was her concession to proper society. But really, she just liked the colors. Vivian selected a deep blue scarf with silver embroidery, draping it experimentally over her head. The silk felt cool and soothing against her abraded scalp. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything today. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come when you did." Mason's expression darkened. "I should have come sooner. After Douglas died, I let Warren's interference keep me away. It won't happen again." There was something in his voice, a quiet intensity, that spoke of deeper feelings than simple obligation to an old friend's widow. Vivian felt a fluttering sensation in her chest, unfamiliar after months of grief. "You're here now," she said simply. "That's what matters." Mason nodded, seeming to struggle with something he wanted to say. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "I don't want you to think that I expect anything from you. Offering you sanctuary doesn't come with conditions." Vivian understood what he was trying to convey. "I never thought it did," she assured him. Relief flashed across his features. "Good. After what Warren did, I didn't want you to feel vulnerable here." "I don't," Vivian said truthfully. "For the first time since Douglas died, I feel safe." Mason held her gaze for a moment longer, something unspoken passing between them. Then he straightened, resuming his customary reserve. "Try to get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." After he left, Vivian remained sitting on the edge of the bed, the silk scarf still draped over her head. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. From somewhere in the house, she could hear Rosa's soft singing in Spanish, a lullaby perhaps for Daniel. Vivian thought of Catherine's last journal entry, "Evil triumphs when good people remain silent." For too long she had been silent first, as the proper Boston wife, then as the grieving Nevada widow. But that silence had ended today, when Warren Harrington had sought to mark her as shamed and powerless. Instead, he had liberated her from the last vestiges of who she had been forcing her to become, who she needed to be. As she finally lay down to sleep, Vivian silently thanked Catherine for the path she had blazed, for the sanctuary she had created, and for the husband she had left behind, a man of principle and quiet strength who had extended his protection to a stranger in need. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new confrontations. But for tonight, in this house, built with love and defended with courage, Vivian Hayes found peace. Dawn broke over Lone Pine Ranch in a spectacular display of crimson and gold, the sun cresting the distant mountains to cast long shadows across the valley. Vivian stood on the porch, Catherine's blue scarf wrapped around her head, watching as the world awakened around her. The air was crisp with the promise of a hot day to come, carrying the scent of sage and juniper on a gentle breeze. Mason joined her 2 steaming cups of coffee in his hands. He offered one to Vivian, who accepted it gratefully. "Sleep well?" he asked, his voice still rough with morning. "Better than I expected," Vivian admitted. "This place has a peacefulness to it." Mason nodded, understanding. Catherine used to say the land here had good spirits, that they watched over those who respected them. They stood in companionable silence, sipping their coffee as the ranch came to life around them. Ranch hands emerged from the bunkhouse, heading to their morning chores. Rosa could be heard singing in the kitchen as she prepared breakfast. It was a rhythm of life that spoke of continuity and purpose, so different from the isolated existence Vivian had known at her homestead after Douglas died. "I've been thinking about your plan," Mason said finally. "Carson City is a 2-day ride, and Warren knows we'll head there eventually. He might try to intercept us." "What do you suggest?" "We split up. I'll take you to Carson City along the high trail. It's longer but safer. Oliver can ride to your homestead with Rosa and Daniel. If Warren's there, Oliver might be able to reason with him, or at least distract him long enough for us to file your claim." Vivian frowned. "I don't like the idea of Rosa and Daniel facing Warren even with Oliver's help." "They won't confront him directly," Mason assured her. "Just observe and report back. Rosa knows the territory better than most men born here, and Daniel—" He hesitated, a hint of pride in his voice. "Daniel has ways of seeing things others miss." Before Vivian could respond, the thunder of approaching hoofbeats caught their attention. They turned to see a rider approaching at full gallop, dust billowing behind him. Mason's hand moved instinctively to his gun. "Get inside," he told Vivian. "Now." But Vivian recognized the rider. "It's Gabriel," she said, relief evident in her voice. Indeed, it was Rosa's cousin, his normally composed demeanor replaced by urgent intensity. He reined his horse to a stop before the porch, the animal's sides heaving from exertion. "Jefe," he called to Mason. "Trouble at the Hayes place. Warren's there with Nathan and his men. They're tearing it apart, looking for something." "The springs," Vivian said grimly. "Did they find them?" Gabriel shook his head. "No, but they're not being gentle about looking."
"They've already pulled up your garden, knocked down half the chicken coop." Anger flared in Vivian's chest, not just at the destruction of her home, but at the sheer arrogance of Warren Harrington's actions. "We need to stop them," she said to Mason. "Agreed, but not alone." Mason turned to Gabriel. "Are my men still at the Harrington place?" "See, helping with the cleanup after the fire." "Ride back and get them, then go to town and tell Sheriff Morrison what's happening. Like him or not, he's still the law around here." Gabriel nodded and wheeled his horse around, galloping back the way he had come. "We'll need Oliver too," Mason continued, already moving toward the house. "And my rifle." Vivian caught his arm. "Mason, wait. If we confront Warren directly, someone could get killed." "That's been true since the day Douglas died," he replied grimly. "Warren's not going to stop until he gets what he wants, or someone makes him stop." "Then let's make him stop legally," Vivian insisted. "The documents Douglas filed are in Carson City. That's where this battle needs to be fought." Mason studied her face, recognizing the determination there. "You're right," he conceded. "But we still need to document what he's doing to your property.
evidence of destruction, trespassing. A new voice joined the conversation. "I can help with that," Oliver Harrington said, stepping onto the porch. The young man looked as though he hadn't slept, his eyes shadowed and his expression troubled. "I'll testify to what Warren's doing, to everything he's done." Vivian and Mason exchanged surprised glances. "Why would you turn against your own brother?" Mason asked bluntly. Oliver swallowed hard. "Because last night, when I helped Nathan away from here, he told me things. Bragged, really thinking I'd be impressed." His voice faltered. "About Douglas. About how Warren had arranged for bandits to intercept him on the road that day. How Warren had been diverting water from surrounding properties for years, causing crops to fail, so he could buy land cheap." He looked directly at Vivian, his young face etched with shame. "And about other things. Women in town who'd refused his advances. Mexican workers who'd complained about conditions. All of them dealt with in ways that left no trail back to Warren." "And you're just now developing a conscience." Mason's voice was hard. "I've known something was wrong for years," Oliver admitted, "but Warren raised me after our parents died. He was all the family I had. I told myself his methods were just frontier justice." He looked down, unable to meet their eyes. "I was a coward, but I'm done being blind." An awkward silence fell, broken by the appearance of Rosa and Daniel at the door. The Mexican woman had clearly overheard the conversation, her dark eyes assessing Oliver with skepticism. "Wolves don't change their coats so easily, senor," she said to the young Harrington. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Oliver replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "Just a chance to do what's right for once." Rosa looked to Mason, who nodded slightly. "We could use someone who knows Warren's mind," he acknowledged. "And having a Harrington stand against him will carry weight with the territorial judge." "Then it's decided," Vivian said. "Mason and I will ride for Carson City with the documents. Oliver, you'll go with Rosa and Daniel to my homestead and document what Warren's doing." "And if Warren discovers them?" Mason asked. "He won't harm his own brother," Vivian said, though she wasn't entirely convinced. Oliver's bitter laugh dispelled any remaining illusion. "You don't know Warren like I do. Blood means nothing to him compared to the Harrington legacy." Mason's expression hardened. "Then you'll take Gabriel and 2 of my men with you. Observe only from a distance. No confrontation." "Si, patron," Rosa agreed. "We will be cautious." "This isn't your fight, Rosa," Mason said gently. "You can stay here where it's safe." The Mexican woman drew herself up proudly. "It became my fight when they marked Senora Vivian like an animal. When they threatened this home. Catherine would not hide, and neither will I." As if to emphasize his grandmother's point, Daniel stepped forward and handed Vivian a new drawing. It showed a group of figures standing together against a backdrop of mountains: Mason, Vivian, Rosa, Daniel, Gabriel, and Oliver. A united front. "We leave in an hour," Mason decided, looking at the drawing with something like wonder. "Pack only what you need. It's a hard ride to Carson City, and Warren's men might be watching the roads." As they dispersed to prepare, Vivian found herself alone with Oliver. The young Harrington twisted his hat in his hands, clearly wanting to say more. "Mrs. Hayes," he began hesitantly, "I want you to know how sorry I am for everything Warren did to you, for not stopping him." Vivian touched her scarf-covered head, the memory of that humiliation still raw. "It's not your apology I need, Mr. Harrington. I know, and Warren will never give it." Oliver's voice hardened with unexpected resolve. "But I can make sure he never hurts anyone else. That's why I'm doing this." Vivian studied him, seeing for the first time not just a weak-willed younger brother, but a man struggling to define himself apart from his family's shadow. "Then prove it," she said simply. "With actions, not words." An hour later, they stood in the yard, horses saddled and provisions secured. The two groups would travel separately, Mason and Vivian heading west toward Carson City, Rosa, Daniel Oliver, and the others east toward the Hayes homestead. As they mounted up, Vivian felt a strange mixture of fear and determination. Everything she had built with Douglas was at stake, yet somehow this felt like more than a battle over land or water rights. It was about justice for Douglas, for Catherine, for all those who had suffered under Warren Harrington's reign of intimidation. "Ready?" Mason asked, bringing his horse alongside hers. Vivian nodded, adjusting Catherine's scarf more securely around her head. "Let's finish this," she said, and they rode out together, the morning sun at their backs, and an uncertain future ahead. Behind them, Daniel watched from his perch behind Rosa on their shared mount. The boy's solemn face lit with a small smile as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, already seeing in his mind's eye the scene he would draw next. A woman with growing hair and fierce eyes, standing tall before a judge reclaiming what was rightfully hers. The vision sustained him as they rode toward confrontation, each member of their unlikely alliance carrying their own wounds, their own reasons for standing against Warren Harrington. United by a common purpose, they moved forward into the day, leaving the sanctuary of Lone Pine behind. None of them saw the lone figure watching from the distant ridge, a spyglass raised to track their movements. Warren Harrington lowered the glass, a cold smile spreading across his face as he observed the two groups separating. Divide and conquer, the oldest strategy in warfare. And now his enemies had done it for him. He turned his horse and rode swiftly away. Plans already forming. The woman thought she could outmaneuver him, filing her claim in Carson City. But Warren Harrington hadn't built the largest ranch in the territory by allowing others to take what he considered his. By nightfall, he vowed this challenge to his authority would be decisively ended. One way or another, the high trail to Carson City wound through rugged terrain, climbing steadily into pine-covered slopes. Mason led the way, his experienced eye scanning for danger, while Vivian followed close behind. Catherine's blue scarf remained wrapped around her head, not just protection against the sun, but a talisman connecting her to the remarkable woman whose principles now guided her path. "We'll rest the horses here," Mason announced, reining in beside a small stream. They dismounted, and Mason offered Vivian his canteen. "We're making good time. Should reach Carson City by tomorrow afternoon, if we push on." Vivian studied the man who had become her unexpected protector. In the dappled sunlight, she could see glimpses of who Mason might have been before grief hardened him. Laugh lines around his eyes now rarely used, a natural grace now burdened by tension. "Tell me about her," Vivian said suddenly. "About Catherine. Not the tragedy of her death, but the life she lived." Surprise flickered across Mason's face. "Why, because she's still so present," Vivian explained. "In your home, in Daniel's drawings, in Rosa's words. I feel like I'm following in her footsteps somehow." Mason was silent for a moment, eyes fixed on the distant horizon. When he spoke, his voice softened with memory. She had a way of seeing potential in things others overlooked. This valley most saw it as harsh, unforgiving. Catherine saw it as resilient, said anything that survived here had to have deep roots and true strength. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. She applied that to people too. "That explains her work as a healer," Vivian observed. Mason nodded. Medicine was just one way she healed. Her real gift was making people see their own worth. The Mexican workers Warren treated like tools. The Indian children the town ignored. She made them visible. "That's a rare quality," Vivian said softly. "The rarest," Mason agreed, his voice holding equal measures of pride and loss. "And the most dangerous in a place built on some people mattering more than others." As they prepared to remount, Vivian voiced a troubling thought. "Mason, if Warren was watching Lone Pine, if he saw us split up, he might guess we're heading to Carson City." "The high trail isn't well known," Mason assured her. "Even if Warren suspects our destination, he's likely to watch the main road." By late afternoon, they reached a high plateau offering a sweeping view of the territory below. Mason pointed to a distant shimmer. "Carson City. We'll camp here tonight and approach in the morning." They made a simple camp. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped rapidly. Huddled near the fire, Vivian found herself shivering. Mason, returning from tending the horses, noticed immediately. "The first night at altitude is always the hardest," he said, settling beside her and extending his arm. "Catherine always said there's no pride in freezing when body heat is available." Vivian hesitated briefly before accepting his offered warmth. Above them, stars emerged in breathtaking profusion. "I never saw stars like this in Boston," Vivian murmured. "Catherine used to say the stars are the eyes of those who've gone before," Mason replied softly. "Watching over the living, guiding them home." The mention of home brought Vivian's thoughts back to her homestead. "Do you think they're safe, Rosa and the others?" Mason's arm tightened slightly around her shoulders. "Rosa is smarter than most men I know. She won't let them take unnecessary risks." "And Oliver, do you trust him?" Mason considered this. "Trust is a strong word for a Harrington, but I believe he wants to make amends. Whether he has the courage to stand against Warren when it matters remains to be seen." "What happens after Carson City?" "After we file the claim?" Vivian asked. "Best case, the territorial authority sends marshals to enforce your rights. Worst case, Warren ignores the law entirely, as he's always done. Then we face that together." Mason promised, the words carrying more weight than simple reassurance. Vivian looked at him, finding his gray eyes intent upon her face. The firelight cast flickering shadows across his weathered features. For a moment, neither spoke, the air between them charged with unspoken possibility. Then Mason gently tucked the blanket more securely around her shoulders. "You should rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." Dawn broke clear and cold. By mid-morning, they reached the outskirts of Carson City. They stabled their horses at a livery, deciding to proceed on foot through the crowded streets. Mason led Vivian through quieter back streets toward the land office. Inside, Mason approached the chief clerk. "We need to see all records pertaining to the Hayes homestead and file additional documentation." "Name of claimant?" the clerk asked. "Vivian Hayes," she replied. "Widow of Douglas Hayes." Recognition flickered in the clerk's eyes. "Ah, yes. I processed your husband's paperwork myself not 3 weeks before his unfortunate accident." "Then you're aware that my husband filed documents establishing me as sole owner?" Vivian asked. "Indeed, Mrs. Hayes. Most irregular procedure, but everything was in order." The clerk retrieved a file. "Hayes homestead 160 acres, with special notation regarding water rights." Mason and Vivian exchanged startled glances. Douglas had specifically mentioned water in his filing. As the clerk reached for their additional papers, the office door banged open. Sheriff Morrison entered with 2 men, one in an expensive suit, the other wearing a territorial marshal's badge. "Hold those papers," Morrison called. "There's a dispute regarding the Hayes claim." The man in the suit addressed the clerk. "Harold Blackwood, representing the Harrington family interests." We're filing a counterclaim based on original territorial grants to the Harrington family in 1858. This is absurd, Vivian protested. My husband's claim is legally filed and recorded. In cases of disputed ownership, the matter must be settled in court, Blackwood replied with a cold smile. Convenient timing, Mason observed dryly, almost as if you knew we'd be here. The marshal stepped forward. Until the ownership dispute is resolved, the land office can't accept additional filings on the property. And when will this dispute be heard? Vivian demanded. Judge Hollister has a full docket, Blackwood replied, perhaps in 6 to 8 weeks. By which time Warren will have stripped my land bare, Vivian said bitterly. The clerk cleared his throat. Once a dispute is filed, neither party may alter the property. It must remain in its current condition until ownership is determined. Which is why Sheriff Morrison and Marshal Reynolds will ride out immediately to ensure compliance, Blackwood added. We insist on accompanying them, Mason said. After some argument, the marshal reluctantly agreed. As they left, Blackwood called after them, Mr. Harrington asked me to convey his sympathies regarding your unfortunate appearance. Vivian stopped turning to face the lawyer. Slowly, deliberately, she unwound Catherine's scarf, revealing her shaved scalp. There were gasps from passers-by, but Vivian held her head high. Tell Mr. Harrington I wear his cruelty as a badge of honor, she said clearly, and that I look forward to seeing him answer for it in court. They rode out of Carson City less than an hour later, following the main road toward Silver Creek Valley. They were approaching the valley when they spotted Gabriel riding hard toward them. He reined in, his expression urgent. Jefe Senora Warren found the springs. Daniel showed Oliver the map, and Oliver betrayed us. He went to Warren and told him everything. Vivian felt as if she'd been struck. Oliver betrayed us, after everything he said. Blood calls to blood, Gabriel said grimly. Where are Rosa and Daniel? Mason asked sharply. Hidden at the old line shack. Warren has men and machinery at the springs digging to divert the water to Harrington land. They pushed hard to catch up with Morrison and the marshal, informing them of Warren's activities. At the Hayes homestead, they found exactly what Gabriel had reported Warren directing men who were excavating the spring site. You're in violation of a territorial non-alteration order, Marshal Reynolds announced firmly. This property is under legal dispute. Warren's face darkened. Do you know who I am? Marshal, who my friends are in Carson City. The law is the law, Reynolds replied evenly. Call off your men before I arrest the lot of you for contempt. Reluctantly, Warren complied. His gaze fell on Vivian's uncovered head. Mrs. Hayes, I see you've decided to display your shame openly. How progressive. The only shame here belongs to you, Vivian replied. Destroying a widow's home, violating law, betraying your brother's memory. Douglas was weak, easily manipulated by a pretty face from back east, Warren snarled. If he hadn't been so besotted with you, he'd still be alive today. Is that a confession? Mason asked quietly. Warren's hand moved toward his gun, but the marshal stepped between them. That's enough, Mr. Harrington. You and your men will leave now. As they prepared to depart, Oliver emerged from the shadows, his young face conflicted. Warren, we need to talk, he began. What you're doing? Shut up, Oliver. His older brother cut him off. We'll discuss your temporary lapse in judgment when we get home. Surveying her damaged property in the gathering darkness, Vivian felt the full weight of what had been lost. The marshal promised to post guards and file a report on Warren's violations. I just want it to be over, Vivian confessed to Mason. I want peace. I know, Mason said softly, his arms encircling her. And you'll have it. But first, there's justice to be done. Dawn revealed the full extent of Warren's destruction. Mason suggested they properly document the springs to strengthen their court case. At the rocky outcropping, they found water seeping from 3 distinct points converging in a natural basin. Douglas was right, Mason said admiringly. These aren't just seasonal springs, they're artesian fed from deep aquifers. They'll flow year-round enough to transform this entire valley. Douglas wanted the water to benefit everyone, Vivian said softly. Not just the Harringtons. Mason nodded, a shadow crossing his features. That sounds like the Douglas I knew before everything changed between us. You never finished telling me what happened, Vivian prompted. How you and Douglas went from friends to strangers. Mason settled on a boulder, gesturing for Vivian to join him. After Catherine got sick, Douglas came to Lone Pine, but when I told him I believed Warren had deliberately kept the doctor away, he became defensive. Mason's jaw tightened. I was angry, told him he was blind to what his brother had become. We didn't speak again for years. Until the week before he died, Vivian said. He rode in like a ghost from the past. Said he'd discovered things about Warren he couldn't ignore anymore. Asked me to look out for you if anything happened to him. Mason's expression darkened. I didn't take him seriously enough. You couldn't have known, Vivian assured him. There's more, Mason said hesitantly. Something I haven't told you about Douglas and me.
Something that explains why Warren's hatred runs deeper than just land and water.
Vivian waited, sensing the importance of his revelation. Catherine wasn't the first woman both Douglas and I loved, Mason said. Years before, there was Eliza Harrington. Warren and Douglas's sister, Vivian asked, surprised. Mason nodded. 5 years younger than Douglas, 10 years younger than Warren. Beautiful spirited. She and I were involved secretly. Her father would never have approved of his daughter with a ranch hand. What happened? Warren found out. He was furious. Douglas intervened, stood up to Warren for the first time. A ghost of a smile touched Mason's lips. But then Eliza fell ill typhoid. She died before we could make any plans together. Warren blamed me for her death, Mason continued. Said my dishonorable intentions had weakened her. He forbade Douglas from maintaining our friendship, but Douglas defied him for a time. So when Catherine came along years later, Vivian began understanding dawning. It was like history repeating itself for Warren, Mason finished. Another woman, he believed, should be beyond my reach, choosing me. He couldn't bear it, pressured Douglas into siding with family. And Douglas gave in, Vivian said, understanding her husband's conflicted loyalties. Until he met you, Mason said with newfound respect. You gave him the courage to start making his own choices again. Their conversation was interrupted by Marshall Reynolds. Oliver Harrington is at the property line, asking to speak with you. Says it's urgent. They found Oliver mounted on a lathered horse, a livid bruise darkening his cheek. Mrs. Hayes, he greeted her. I need to speak with you and Mr. Thatcher privately. After some hesitation, the marshal allowed them to speak beneath a cottonwood tree. Warren did that to you, Mason asked, indicating the bruise. Oliver nodded. After we left yesterday. Said I'd betrayed the family. He looked directly at Vivian. Mrs. Hayes Warren is beyond reason now. He's convinced himself that you and Mason have conspired to steal his birthright. What's he planning? Mason asked. He's gathering men, not just ranch hands, but hired guns. He says the marshal can't watch your property forever. When the authorities leave, he'll reclaim what's his by any means necessary. And you came to warn us, Mason asked skeptically, after betraying us to Warren. I was wrong, Oliver admitted shamefully. I've been wrong for years, following Warren blindly excusing his cruelties. What do you want from us? Vivian asked. Nothing. I just wanted you to be prepared. Oliver reached into his jacket, withdrawing a small leather notebook. Warren keeps records of everything: bribes, threats, arrangements with Morrison. I took this from his desk before I left. He handed it to Mason, who flipped through it with growing appreciation. This is dynamite, Oliver. With this, the territorial court can't ignore Warren's corruption. It's a death sentence if he finds out I took it, Oliver said bleakly. Come with us to Lone Pine, Vivian offered. You'll be safe there until the hearing. Oliver considered this, then nodded slowly. All right, but we should leave soon. Warren has men watching the roads. Their journey to Lone Pine was tense but uneventful. Gabriel met them at the boundary with armed ranch hands. Rosa and Daniel welcomed them at the house, though Rosa viewed Oliver with suspicion. That night, as the household settled, Vivian found herself unable to sleep. She ventured outside where the stars blazed overhead. The lone pine on the ridge stood silhouetted against the night sky. Catherine used to stand right there on sleepless nights, Mason's voice came from behind her. Said the stars spoke to her when the world was quiet. He joined her at the porch railing. What if Warren does come with force? Vivian asked. What if the law isn't enough to stop him? Then we defend what's ours, Mason said simply. But I believe Oliver's evidence will make a difference. Exposure is what Warren fears most. And after, Vivian pressed. After the hearing, after Warren is dealt with, what then? The question hung between them, layered with meaning. Mason faced her fully. That depends on what you want, he said quietly. Your land is yours regardless of what happens between us. You could rebuild there, or... He hesitated. Or you could consider other possibilities. It's too soon, she whispered, not in rejection but honest assessment. Douglas has been gone only months, and Catherine's memory still fills this house. Mason nodded understandingly. I'm not asking for decisions tonight, only acknowledging what's growing between us. Their conversation was interrupted by approaching hoofbeats. Sheriff Morrison rode into the yard, calling out for Mason.
What brings you here at this hour? Mason asked warily.
Morrison removed his hat, his face grim in the moonlight. Trouble. Warren Harrington is dead, shot in his study this evening. Vivian steadied herself against the railing, while Mason's expression hardened. And you rode all the way out here to tell us why? Mason demanded. Because half the county will think you did it, Morrison replied bluntly. There was a note pinned to Warren's chest. It said, Justice for Douglas Hayes. Vivian felt the blood drain from her face. Someone had killed Warren and implicated her or Mason. Gabriel checked on Oliver at Mason's request, returning with troubling news. Oliver's gone. Windows open, his horse missing from the stable. The implications settled heavily. Oliver had access to Warren's notebook, knew the evidence it contained, and had recently been beaten by his brother. He had motive, opportunity, and now apparent flight. I need to find him before Nathan or the marshal does, Morrison decided. Why are you really helping us? Mason asked. Because I'm tired, Thatcher. Tired of being bought and paid for. Tired of watching good people suffer while men like Warren prosper. He adjusted his hat brim. Maybe it's time I remembered what this badge is supposed to mean. After Morrison departed, Daniel sought out Vivian. The boy drew a simple image, scales of justice perfectly balanced, but with a question mark where the hand holding them should be. You're saying justice happened, but we don't know who delivered it, Vivian interpreted. Daniel nodded, then drew another image, a road leading to a rising sun with Vivian and Mason standing together, looking forward rather than back. "You're very wise, Daniel," Vivian told him. "Catherine would be proud of you." The next few days passed in tense anticipation. Marshal Reynolds conducted interviews with everyone at Lone Pine. Oliver remained missing. Nathan Harrington publicly accused Mason of orchestrating his brother's murder, though without evidence. 5 days after Warren's death, word came from Carson City. The territorial court would proceed with the hearing as scheduled despite the ongoing murder investigation. The morning of the hearing, Vivian stood before the mirror, Catherine's blue scarf in her hands. Her hair had begun to grow back a soft fuzz, now covering her scalp. With deliberate care, she folded the scarf and placed it in her pocket. She would face the court as she was without shame or concealment. Mason waited for her on the porch, his eyes widening slightly at her uncovered head, then filling with quiet admiration. "You look beautiful," he said softly, "and formidable." The territorial court in Carson City was packed. Judge Hollister called the proceedings to order, making it clear he would tolerate no mention of Warren's murder during the land dispute hearing. The hearing proceeded with legal arguments from both sides. When Vivian testified, she approached the witness stand with her head held high, aware of the whispers that followed her. After hours of testimony, a commotion erupted in the corridor. Sheriff Morrison burst in supporting a battered and exhausted Oliver Harrington. "Your Honor," Morrison called, "I have a witness with crucial testimony relevant to this case." Oliver, despite Nathan's outraged accusations, testified about Warren's obsession with the Hayes property and his knowledge of the springs' existence years before Douglas discovered them. "Warren knew about the springs from our grandfather's time," Oliver explained, "but they had seemingly dried up, so he allowed Douglas to homestead that section, considering it worthless. When Douglas discovered the springs were still viable, Warren saw it as a threat to his control of the valley's water." After hearing all testimony, Judge Hollister announced his ruling. This court finds in favor of Vivian Hayes. The property and associated water rights legally belong to her as established by Douglas Hayes's properly filed documents. However, the judge continued, given the unique value of the underground springs, this court orders the creation of a water management district to oversee fair distribution. Mrs. Hayes will retain ownership and primary rights, but neighboring properties, including the Harrington Ranch, will be granted reasonable access subject to district oversight and appropriate compensation. It was a compromise that honored Douglas's vision while protecting Vivian's legal rights. With a rap of his gavel, Judge Hollister closed the proceedings. After hearing all testimony, Judge Hollister announced his ruling. This court finds in favor of Vivian Hayes. The property and associated water rights legally belong to her as established by Douglas Hayes's properly filed documents. However, the judge continued, given the unique value of the underground springs, this court orders the creation of a water management district to oversee fair distribution. Mrs. Hayes will retain ownership and primary rights, but neighboring properties, including the Harrington Ranch, will be granted reasonable access subject to district oversight and appropriate compensation. It was a compromise that honored Douglas's vision while protecting Vivian's legal rights. With a rap of his gavel, Judge Hollister closed the proceedings. In the weeks that followed, Oliver Harrington faced his own reckoning. Though never formally charged in Warren's death, the investigation remained officially unsolved. Whispers followed him throughout the territory. Nathan refused to speak to him publicly, disowning his younger brother as a traitor to the Harrington name. The Grand Harrington Ranch, once the crown jewel of the territory, fell into Nathan's bitter hands. Oliver, for his part, declined to fight for his inheritance. "There's been enough fighting over land," he told Mason when they met in town one day. "I'm heading to California, starting fresh, where my name doesn't carry so much history." Before he left, however, Oliver made one significant contribution. He accepted a founding position on the Water Management District's board, helping to establish fair guidelines that would govern the resource for generations to come. It was, Vivian thought, a final act of atonement. "Your husband would be proud," Oliver told her the day he departed. "He wanted this water to benefit everyone. Now it will." As for Sheriff Morrison, his newfound commitment to justice proved more than temporary. With Warren's corrupting influence removed, he began enforcing the law with surprising impartiality, though he never spoke of what he might have known about Warren's death. 6 months later, Vivian stood on the porch of her rebuilt cabin, watching workers complete an irrigation channel from the springs to neighboring properties. Her hair had grown back, forming a cap of honey-colored curls that framed her face. Mason approached on horseback, returning from inspecting the district's operations. As chairman of the Oversight Board, he had worked tirelessly to ensure fair implementation of the court's ruling. "The North Channel is flowing well," he reported after dismounting. "The Sanchez family should have water reaching their fields by tomorrow." "How are things at Lone Pine?" Vivian asked. Mason still maintained his own ranch, though he spent increasing time at Vivian's homestead. "Daniel asked me to give you this," he said, reaching into his pocket to withdraw a folded paper. Vivian opened it to find a skillfully rendered image of the cabin surrounded by flourishing gardens. In the foreground stood 2 figures, herself and Mason hand in hand, and between them a small child. Heat rushed to her cheeks as she realized the meaning. "He's become quite the artist," she commented, trying to mask her reaction. "He sees possibilities," Mason said with a smile. "Not just what is, but what could be." Their relationship had evolved slowly over the months, building on foundations of mutual respect. They had grieved together for Douglas, for Catherine, for all that had been lost. And gradually grief had made space for something new to grow. "What do you think of his vision?" Mason asked, his voice carefully neutral. Vivian considered the drawing, allowing herself to imagine the future it depicted. Not a replacement for what she had lost with Douglas, but something different, equally meaningful. "I think Daniel is wise beyond his years," she said slowly, "and that some visions are worth working toward." Mason's smile deepened, reaching his eyes. Without words, he offered his hand, not demanding, simply inviting. Vivian placed her hand in his, their fingers interlacing with the ease of practice and the thrill of possibility. Together, they looked out over the land that had cost so much and promised so much more. "Catherine once told me," Mason said softly, "that tears in the dust create the strongest foundations. That suffering, when transformed by love, builds something unbreakable." As the sun set over Nevada Territory, painting the landscape in gold and crimson, Vivian Hayes looked toward tomorrow with hope, rather than fear, knowing that whatever came next, she would face it, standing tall, uncovered, and unashamed.